Breaking news that you need to know about right now. Tua Tagovailoa is in concussion protocol once again.
Also placed Tua in the concussion protocol.
And when you start seeing concussions in close proximity, that's a reason, that's an alarm to be majorly concerned.
The question is, though, is Tua's health?
It's been 3 years
and
since
whether the Dolphins are
Does
concerned
Tua
about how
Tagovailoa
they
ever
have
play
to
again?
whether they want to put
Like, truly?
yeah.
Guys retire when they get concussions repeatedly. That's all I'm saying.
Tua Tagovailoa is one of the biggest topics coming into this season. He had some amazing moments in his third year in the pros, but it came with 3 concussions, and he even considered retiring. Tua was good enough for the Miami Dolphins to make the postseason and look like a contender there for a bit. Now, Tua is a huge question mark heading into this season, but if he can play like he did last year and actually stay healthy, the Dolphins could be pretty damn good. Tua Tagovailoa had a very, very hectic 2022. In February, the Dolphins hired Mike McDaniel to be their next head coach. McDaniel was very supportive of Tua.
It's the most accurate catchable ball I've ever seen. So,
The most accurate catchable ball you've ever seen.
I mean, yeah.
And some expectations started to brew. Miami started the season with a win over the Patriots. Tua played well. He passed for 270 yards and a touchdown. Then the next week, he had a career-high 469 yards, 6 touchdowns, which tied the Dolphins franchise record, and 2 interceptions in a bizarre 21-point comeback to beat the Ravens. It was the first 21-plus point fourth quarter comeback since 2011. The Dolphins followed it up with a close win over the Bills the next week to improve to 3-0. But that's when things started getting complicated for Tua. He briefly left the game with what the Dolphins claimed was a back injury before he did return. The NFLPA suspected that Miami might have violated concussion protocol, and they launched an investigation. Fast forward 4 days later, and the Dolphins faced the Bengals on Thursday Night Football. Tua was a game-time decision and was cleared to play. In the second quarter, Tua was sacked and he hit his head on the ground. He had a fencing response and was stretchered off the field and transported to the hospital. 2 days later, the neurotrauma consultant who cleared him during the Bills game was fired. Tua was in concussion protocol until October 15th. He returned in Week 7, and the Dolphins went on to win 5 straight games. Over that span, Tua completed 69.8% of his throws with 1,529 yards and 11 touchdowns without a single interception. Miami was 8-3 and were on the fast track to the postseason, and then things kind of fell apart. In Week 13, the Dolphins faced the 49ers. That was the game where Jimmy Garoppolo suffered an injury and Brock Purdy was thrusted into the starting role. San Francisco ended up winning, and a lot of that was because of the way the defense contained Tua. The 49ers were able to get pressure on Tua and messed up the timing of his receivers by throwing off Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle off the line. Tua didn't have the same anticipation, and from there, teams started adapting the way to stop the Dolphins. Including the loss to the Niners, Miami lost 5 straight. Tua completed only 52.6% of his passes with 984 yards and 6 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, but he only played in 4 of those losses. In Week 16 against the Packers, Tua looked terrible. He threw 3 interceptions and didn't even look like himself. The next day, Tua entered concussion protocol after he was experiencing some concussion symptoms he suffered in the game. Tua did not play for the rest of the season. The Dolphins made the playoffs and narrowly lost to the Bills with Skylar Thompson behind center. Tua only ended up playing in 13 games. He threw for 3,548 yards and 25 touchdowns to 8 interceptions with a 64.8 completion percentage. Tua actually led the AFC overall fan votes for the Pro Bowl, but did not make it and was instead an alternate. Meanwhile, Tyler Huntley made it after he threw for a wild 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in 4 starts. Yes, the Pro Bowl is a joke. 2022 was a bit of a nightmare for Tua. Miami showed a lot of promise in Mike McDaniel's first season, but the Tua situation put a dark cloud over the team. He suffered 3 concussions and left a lot of questions to be answered. The Dolphins had to make a decision on his 5th-year option and decided to pick it up. It's hard to blame them because Tua has gotten better each year in the pros. The Dolphins used the 5th overall pick back at the 2020 NFL Draft on Tua Tagovailoa. It was a very hyped up quarterback class. Joe Burrow ended up going first, and then Tua went at 5, followed by Justin Herbert at 6. Later in the first round, the Packers took Jordan Love, and in the second round, the Eagles selected Jalen Hurts. It has been a very good class, and looking back, the Dolphins would probably not take Tua at 5. I have to imagine that Herbert would be the pick in hindsight, maybe even Hurts. Tua ended up starting his rookie season as the backup to Ryan Fitzpatrick. Tua didn't see the field until week 6 when he came in relief of Fitzpatrick. He only threw 2 passes for 9 yards. The Dolphins had a week 7 bye, and Tua was named the starter going forward. In his first NFL start, Tua went 12 of 22 with 93 yards and a touchdown. Miami won his first 3 starts as Tua threw for 5 touchdowns without a pick. In week 11, Tua was replaced by Fitzpatrick in a loss to the Broncos. Then in practice, he jammed his thumb and missed the Dolphins' next game. Tua returned and started the last 5 games of the year. He was mid at best with 5 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. The Dolphins' last game of the season left a very sour taste in everyone's mouth. The Dolphins needed to win to make the playoffs, but got blown out by the Bills as Tua threw 3 interceptions. He had a pretty rocky rookie year. He finished with a 64.1 completion percentage, 1,814 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. Tua Tagovailoa entered the 2021 season as the starter, but backup Jacoby Brissett did still get some starts too. The Dolphins began the year with a win over the Patriots. Then in week 2, Tua suffered a rib injury and was carted off the field. He didn't play again until week 6. In his first game back, he passed for 329 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception in a close loss to the Jaguars. It dropped the Dolphins down to 1-5, and Miami lost their next 2 games as well, falling to 1-7. Tua dealt with a finger injury and didn't play in week 9, but the Dolphins got back on track with a win. Brissett got the start the next week, but Tua came in off the bench and rushed for a touchdown in a big upset win over the Ravens. He got the starting job back, and the Dolphins got hot. They won 7 straight. In the 6th Tua played in, he passed for 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. It was an impressive turnaround for Miami, but the Dolphins got blown out by the Titans in week 17. Tua only completed 18 of 38 throws with an interception, and the Dolphins missed the playoffs. Tua finished the year with a 67.8 completion percentage, 2,653 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. It was a step in the right direction, but Tua really didn't start showing his true potential until Brian Flores was replaced by Mike McDaniel, and the Dolphins really started to build around him. The biggest move the Dolphins have made to help with the development of Tua Tagovailoa was acquiring Tyreek Hill. Miami had to give up a pretty penny for Tyreek, a first, a second, 2 fourths, and a 6th. They also gave him a 4-year, $120 million extension. He was coming off of back-to-back seasons in Kansas City with over 1,200 yards, and he got even better in Miami. Last year, Tyreek had 1,710 yards and 7 touchdowns on 111 receptions. He was great, and it allowed Jalen Waddle to thrive as the number 2. He played at Alabama with Tua, and the Dolphins drafted him in the first round. As a rookie in 2021, Waddle had just over 1,000 yards, but last season, Waddle dominated. He caught 75 passes for 1,356 yards and 8 touchdowns. The depth behind Tyreek and Waddle isn't great. The 3 is probably Cedric Wilson Jr., who had just 136 yards last season. The tight end position is is pretty weak with Durham Smith, who had just 129 yards and a touchdown in 2022. Raheem Mostert was the Dolphins' top rusher last season with about 900 yards. Jeff Wilson will surely have a role behind him, and the Dolphins did just draft Devon Achane in the 3rd round. The biggest issue could be the Dolphins' offensive line, which is pretty bad, but Teron Armstead makes the line better over at left tackle if he can actually stay healthy. The Dolphins' offense isn't too crazy past Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but that is probably enough for Miami to make the postseason. The defense is good, and if Tua Tagovailoa can just play solid, the Dolphins are in a solid spot. Mike McDaniel had a very impressive first year in Miami, but a lot of his future success is going to rely on the health of Tua. He has shown he can play at a high level, but a string of concussions has left a lot of doubt.